Hi guys. We want to do a little review of the scientific method and things that go along with that. So I want you to think back to the beginning of the year when I pulled out a flashlight and said I was going to show you something, and then I tried to turn on the flashlight and it didn't work. You guys suggested to me that the batteries needed to be replaced. So I replaced the batteries and then turned on the flashlight, and then you saw that it worked. I did that because it demonstrated the steps of the scientific method. So think back to these 6 steps that we talked about at the beginning of the year. Step 1, state the problem. Step 2, gather information. Step 3, form a hypothesis. Step 4, test the hypothesis. 5, analyze the data. And 6, form the conclusion. So applying this to our flashlight issue, we had state the problem. Well, the problem was that the flashlight didn't work. It didn't turn on when I pushed the switch. I gathered information by asking you guys what you thought, and you guys said probably should change the batteries. So I formed a hypothesis that if I were to change the batteries, then the flashlight will work. So that's my hypothesis. We tested the hypothesis in doing an experiment when we changed the batteries and then tested the flashlight again. Analyze the data. I don't know if we really did that one. We didn't make any charts. We didn't form a data table or anything like that, but we did form a conclusion, and that was that the flashlight worked when the batteries were changed. So our hypothesis was true. Let me skip forward a couple slides here. Okay, so I want to focus more on less on the steps of the scientific method and more specifically on hypotheses and the independent variable and dependent variable. The hypothesis is a testable prediction or an educated guess about the outcome of an experiment. Can be an if-then statement, not always, but that's pretty much what we'll do in this class. We'll test the hypothesis with an experiment, which is an organized method of testing the hypothesis. And in our experiment, we will have variables, things that will change in the experiment. So there's two important variables. One is the independent variable. This is where we need to kind of dig our heels in a little bit. There's the independent variable, and this is what the experimenter changes directly. Now, this is important. It is the cause of the change. In a hypothesis, it's usually what follows the if statement. If this, then that. The dependent variable is supposed to change as a result, or it is the effect of changing the independent variable. So the independent variable is the cause, the dependent variable is the effect. So if we were to write a hypothesis, it would be if we do this to the independent variable, then the dependent variable will change as a result. So those are important to be able to pick out of an experiment. If we go back to our flashlight experiment, what was the cause of the change? What did we change directly? That's the independent variable. And what we changed directly, what was the cause of the change, was the batteries. And what are the batteries? What did they have an effect on? They had an effect on the lighting of the bulb, so whether or not the flashlight worked. So our independent variable was the batteries. They were the cause of the change, and the dependent variable was the lighting of the flashlight. That was the effect. That was the effect. Just applying that to a few more scenarios. We're going to start with a question, and then we're going to write it. We're going to figure out the independent variable, the dependent variable, and then come up with a possible hypothesis. So, how will the temperature, water temperature, affect the cooking time of an egg? Okay, well, there's two things that are going on here. We've got the water temperature can change, and the cook time of the egg can change. What we have to do is figure out what is the cause and what's the effect. Okay. Is the water temperature going to affect the cooking time of an egg, or is the cook time of the egg going to affect the water temperature? Well, the only thing that makes sense here is that the water temperature will affect the cook time of an egg. So the cause of the situation here is going to be the water temperature, which becomes our independent variable, and the effect okay, is going to be on the cooking time of an egg. So we might write a hypothesis that if the water temperature gets hotter, then the eggs will cook faster. That would be a plausible hypothesis. So the hotter water temperature is going to be the cause of the change, and the effect is going to be on the cook time of the egg. We think it's going to cook faster. That's a scenario one. A couple more examples, writing the independent variable, dependent variable, and hypothesis. So what we think, we're wondering how the number of eggs produced by chickens will be affected by how much daylight they're exposed to. So we want to figure out what's being changed here. So number of eggs is going to be changing here, and the hours of sunlight. And what we want to ask ourselves is the number of eggs going to affect the sunlight, or is the sunlight going to affect the number of eggs? Well, I think it makes sense to say that the sunlight might affect the number of eggs. So the sunlight is causing the change. The cause of the change is our independent variable, okay? And the effect we think is going to be on the number of eggs, okay? And the effect is the dependent variable. So and we might come up with a hypothesis that if the hens are exposed to more daylight, then they will produce more eggs. So again, our if is followed by the independent variable, daylight, and the then should be followed by the dependent variable, which is the number of eggs. So another possible scenario, how will X-ray exposure of pregnant mice affect the rate of birth defects? What we want to figure out is what's going to affect what. Okay, so we've got X-ray exposure and then rate of birth defects. Those are our two variables that we want to figure out which is which. And so what's going to affect what? Is the X-ray exposure going to affect birth defects? Or will the birth defects affect how much X-ray exposure they're exposed to? Well, I think it makes more sense to say that the X-rays will affect the birth defects. So X-ray is our cause, and the cause is which one? The cause is the independent variable. So that's our independent variable is X-ray exposure, and the dependent variable is the number of the rate of birth defects. So if we want to put that into a hypothesis, we think we might say that if X-ray exposures are increased, then the rate of birth defects will also increase. That is a possible explanation or hypothesis like that. The last one I want to go through, just as one more example, is how will the number of referrals to the principal's office be affected by including Mountain Dew in the vending machine sold? So we've got number of referrals is one variable. How will the number of referrals be affected by? And then the second variable is whether or not we've got Mountain Dew in the vending machine. So what do we think is going to affect what? Will the number of referrals, okay, be affected by the Mountain Dew, or will the Mountain Dew affect the number of referrals? What's going to be the cause of the change? Do we think the referrals is going to cause a change in the Mountain Dew, or do we think the Mountain Dew is going to cause a change in the referrals? I think we think that the Mountain Dew will be the cause and the number of referrals will be the effect. So again, the cause is our independent variable, which is the Mountain Dew, okay? And the effect would be on the number of referrals to the principal's office. So, and that would be our dependent variable. So if we were to write a hypothesis, we might think that the extra caffeine might make students a little squirrely. So we might write a hypothesis that if Mountain Dew is included in the vending machines, then the number of referrals to the principal's office will increase. And so that is how to pick out the independent variable, dependent variable, and how to write a hypothesis.